Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're actually opening up a patient's private diary to get a raw, day-by-day look at what one cycle of chemotherapy is really like. This is an unfiltered look at the physical and emotional reality of treatment told through their own words. So, this whole journey kicks off with a totally unexpected hospital stay for what's called consolidation chemotherapy. And as you can tell from this quote, the patient was just not ready for it. There's this immediate feeling of frustration and a total loss of control. Right from this moment, everything is up in the air, depending entirely on how their body decides to respond. And this number right here, 200. This is what dictates everything. That's the patient's white blood cell count. Now, just to give you a little context, a healthy person has a count in the thousands, so 200 is critically low. It means they're in a state called aplasia, which makes them incredibly vulnerable to any infection. And so, the long, anxious wait for recovery begins. Okay, so let's dive into day one, an unexpected stay. These first 24 hours really set the scene for all the medical challenges and, the emotional hurdles that are about to come. That first day is just a marathon of waiting. If you look at this timeline, it's pretty clear. They get there, and it takes nearly 4 hours just to get settled into a room. And that time is filled with things like IVs and transfusions. But mostly, it's just a whole lot of waiting around. And on top of all the huge medical worries, sometimes it's the little things that just grind you down. The room is freezing cold, forcing the patient to pile on blankets just to sit there. It's a small detail, sure, but it shows how even your surroundings can add to the physical and emotional weight of it all. All right, fast forward to Friday, and we're deep in what the diary calls the hospital grind. This is where the daily reality of being in the hospital really starts to hit. It's not just about the treatment anymore, it's about navigating all the little logistical nightmares and delays. Oh man, this timeline is it perfectly captures that classic hospital hurry up and wait absurdity, right? The day kicks off with instructions to prep for an ultrasound, but oops, the elevator's broken. So for hours they can't eat, can't do anything, just wait. Then all of a sudden, it's a rush to get the scan done, and they're back just in time for lunch. It's a perfect little snapshot of institutional chaos. And it's not just about waiting around. The frustrations pop up everywhere. Even something as simple and necessary as getting a work certificate for their job becomes this whole other source of stress. The patient notes that this totally routine request seemed to create this weird tension with the staff, which just piles on another emotional burden. So, what do you do when you're faced with all this uncertainty, this total lack of control? Well, for this patient, the answer was to turn to the one thing they felt they could control, making their own calculations. Okay, so they start by basically analyzing the chemo dose. And when you look at this comparison, it's pretty clear, right? This cycle is way, way less intense than the last one. About half the cytarabine and no idarubicin at all. They figure the overall wallop is only about 30 to 40% of the last much tougher round. And that leads to a really big question. Which, of course, leads to the big question. If the chemo dose was weaker, does that mean my recovery will be faster? This isn't just some idle thought. It becomes the whole basis for their attempt to kind of mathematically map out their own recovery, a way to create a path back to health when nobody else can give them one. So using that rough 40% figure, they actually build this forecast you see here. They're thinking, okay, last time it took 7 bags of platelets, so maybe this time it'll only be 3. And 5 bags of blood last time, so maybe 2 this time. They do the same thing for the growth factor shots. It's a really logical approach, even if it's not, medically precise. It's an attempt to predict the future. And here's the really important part. The patient knows this isn't scientific. They're totally self-aware about it. They say, I know these calculations don't make sense, but that's how I am. This isn't about getting the medically correct answer. It's a deeply human need to find some kind of order, some predictability in the complete chaos of being seriously ill. Okay, now we get to Monday. And in the diary, this is just called the longest day. After a weekend that was kind of stable, this is where the physical part of the ordeal really, really ramps up, making it one of the absolute worst days of the whole stay. And this just lays out the physical toll in excruciating detail. A routine platelet transfusion goes sideways when the IV fails, and what happens next is just an ordeal. Look at this. One attempt fails, then another on the other wrist, and another on the elbow. 3 painful failed attempts before they finally get one to work in a really awkward spot. It's just a visceral reminder of how punishing this whole process can be on a person's body. So after that absolutely brutal start to the week, we finally get to what feels like the final push home. This is where the numbers, the very same numbers the patient was trying to predict, finally start moving in the right direction, and it sparks some real hope for getting out of there. And you can see that turnaround right here on this chart. After being stuck down around that dangerous 200 mark, the white blood cell count just explodes. It jumps to 800 on Tuesday, then all the way up to 2,000 on Wednesday. For the first time in days, they feel a little less fragile, and you can bet their spirits are climbing right along with those numbers. And with those great numbers comes the news every single patient is just desperate to hear. The doctor says, you should be going home tomorrow. Can you just imagine the massive wave of relief? The end is finally in sight. But then, that high just comes crashing down. Thursday morning, the doctors come back with bad news. Yeah, white cells are up, but hemoglobin and platelets have dropped again. The discharge is off. It's just a devastating emotional whiplash, from the brink of going home right back into that pit of uncertainty. So Friday finally rolls around, and they get the green light. Medically, they are cleared to go home. But then, just when you think it's over, one last real-world problem pops up. There's a family emergency. Their ride home isn't available anymore. So even after clearing the medical hurdles, they're now logistically trapped. So, after all of that, the emotional roller coaster, the pain, the waiting, what does this whole 8-day ordeal look like when you just boil it down to the numbers? Let's take a look. Well, here it is, the final tally. 8 days in the hospital for this stay, but it was part of a 12-day total. And in that time, look at this. 6 platelet transfusions, 2 blood transfusions, 12 of those growth factor shots to kickstart the immune system. In fact, on 7 of the 8 days, a transfusion of some kind was needed. These aren't just stats. They represent a massive amount of medical intervention just to get through one single phase of treatment. And that really brings us to the final, sobering thought here. This whole intense, draining 8-day story we've just followed, it's not the end of the journey. It's not even close. It's just one cycle, one chapter, in a much longer book. And it really leaves you wondering, what does it truly take, in body and in spirit, to endure the entire thing?